The hum of the Genesis was a constant companion, a soothing drone that filled the empty silence of space. Captain Lena Steele stood at the helm, her fingers lightly resting on the control panel, eyes focused on the screen before her. The space around them was a sea of stars, distant and cold, yet the silence was broken by the unmistakable presence of something out of place. "Approaching the station, Captain," Lieutenant Rajan's voice crackled through the intercom. "We're within range." Lena's eyes flicked to the display. The station was small, barely more than a rusted skeleton of what it once was. Its metal frame was cloaked in a cloud of debris, remnants of whatever had once happened here. The transmission from the station had been faint, but the signal contained something valuable. Some part of it had intrigued the higher-ups back at command, enough to send her and the Genesis on this mission to investigate. She had never been one for relic hunting, but the galaxy was full of mysteries, and this one was no different. "Bring us in, Lieutenant. Let's see what's left of this place." The ship's engines hummed lower as the space station loomed larger, the jagged metal outlines cutting through the stars like the sharp edges of a forgotten memory. Lena's thoughts drifted to the endless possibilities. What could have happened here? Who lived here? Why was it abandoned? The mystery pulled at her. "Sending boarding party down," Rajan said after a pause, his voice tinged with curiosity. "It's not like anything we've seen before." Lena nodded, adjusting her seat. "Understood. We'll meet you in the docking bay." When Lena stepped into the docking bay, the atmosphere shifted. The air was stale, the low hum of power barely working its way through the skeletal frame of the station. She could sense the unease of the crew as they followed her through the narrow corridors, their boots echoing off the cold metal floors. The station seemed to have been long abandoned, yet there was a strange feeling of presence, as if someone, had just recently walked through. The crew fanned out as Lena approached the central chamber. It was vast, filled with rows of broken consoles and disintegrating equipment. The walls were etched with symbols she couldn't identify, lines and patterns that twisted and turned in impossible directions, reminding her of ancient languages she'd seen in books from her youth. She leaned closer, running her fingers lightly over one of the symbols. "This place is old," Lieutenant Storiy said, breaking the silence. Her voice echoed around the chamber, reminding everyone just how eerie the place felt. "I can't even recognize the tech. Definitely not anything from our time." Lena studied the symbols, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't need to be a historian to recognize the patterns, but it didn't make sense. The technology here felt too advanced, yet strangely primitive at the same time. What civilization had built this? Her musings were interrupted by a soft, unearthly glow from across the room. At first, she thought it was just another malfunctioning console, but as she walked closer, her breath caught. At the center of the room sat a pedestal, and on it lay an artifact, strange, with an otherworldly, soft blue light emanating from it. But what caught Lena off guard wasn't the artifact itself. To its right, next to it, almost as an afterthought, sat a perfectly toasted slice of bread. The crew had gone silent, some leaning in closer, others exchanging puzzled glances. It was a bizarre sight, an object of obvious importance beside a simple food item. There was no indication that the bread had any relevance to the artifact, yet the unusual pairing sent a ripple of confusion through the group. "Captain," Rajan said, his voice a whisper, "this isn't right." Lena's eyes scanned the room, noting the oddity of the situation. The bread was perfectly toasted, the edges slightly charred, the golden hue of the surface in stark contrast to the dull, decaying surroundings. How could something so mundane be here, right next to an artifact of apparent power? Her mind raced through possibilities. Could it be a marker? A message? Or was it simply out of place? But the way it sat there, almost expectantly, made her feel like the bread was just as important as the glowing artifact beside it. She knelt down, inspecting both objects carefully. The artifact was metallic, shaped like a cube with intricate patterns, and seemed to pulse with a low hum, almost like a heartbeat. A closer look revealed a small slot in the side, and she wondered if something could be inserted there. "Rajan, Storiy," she called, "take a look at this. I don't know what we've got here, but something tells me this isn't just a random discovery." Storiy moved incautiously, and Rajan squatted beside the artifact, his brow furrowed. He seemed reluctant to touch either object, yet his curiosity got the better of him. Could be a data source, some sort of old power device, he said, eyes flicking between the artifact and the bread. But the bread. That's out of place, Lena finished for him. I know. There was a strange energy in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of Lena's neck stand on end. She stood up abruptly, feeling a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Her crew exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to touch anything or leave it undisturbed. We're not leaving empty-handed, Lena said, shaking her head. Let's see what this thing can do. With careful precision, she pressed a button on the side of the artifact. The glow intensified, blinding for a moment before it steadied into a soft, steady light. Then, without warning, the entire station trembled beneath their feet. The hum grew louder, more urgent. "Captain!" Rajan yelled, his voice rising in panic. "The power's spiking!" Before Lena could respond, a loud crash echoed through the station. A dark shadow loomed in the doorway, a figure in heavy armor emerging into the chamber. The crew tensed, but Lena instinctively stepped forward. The figure's eyes gleamed with malice as it spoke, its voice deep and cold. "You've activated it, human. The artifact belongs to the Zorathian Empire now." Lena's heart sank as the realization hit her. Whoever they were not alone. "Shut it down now," she ordered, as the rest of her crew scrambled to find a way to stop the surge of energy. But it was too late. The bread, just a simple slice, began to glow, its energy intensifying, as if responding to the artifact's power. The station shook once more, and the lights flickered out. All around them, the hum turned into a deafening roar. As Lena's eyes narrowed on the glowing bread, she could only think one thing: what had they just unleashed? The tension in the command center was palpable as Captain Lena Steele's eyes darted between the chaotic readings on the control screens. The Genesis shook violently, its hull groaning under the strain of the alien energy now coursing through the station. The lights flickered, casting fleeting shadows across the faces of the crew. "Captain!" Rajan's voice cracked over the comm, sharp with urgency. "The station's destabilizing. We've got about 5 minutes before we lose full control." Lena's heart raced as she turned to face her officers. Lieutenant Saria, her tactical officer, stood near the observation window, her face pale and tight with concern. The low, unnerving hum from the artifact had intensified, and a sudden, overwhelming energy surge began to ripple through the ship. "What in the hell did we just trigger?" Saria muttered, watching the energy readings climb rapidly. "I don't know yet," Lena replied, her voice steady despite the rising panic. "But we need to get out of here now." The glow from the artifact was unmistakable, pulsing violently with unnatural energy. Beside it, the toasted slice of bread gleamed brighter than before, as if feeding off the artifact's power. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the bread's significance was, it was far more critical than anyone had realized. Yet she had no time to dwell on it now. "Prep the crew," Lena ordered, her voice cold with authority. "We're getting back to the ship. But we need to take that artifact with us. We have no idea what kind of weapon we've just found, and I won't leave it in the hands of anyone else." The urgency in her tone left no room for argument. Her crew scrambled, gathering their equipment and preparing for extraction. But Lena knew they weren't alone. The figure from before, the one who had warned them, was still out there, somewhere. And she didn't trust that they had the luxury of escaping unnoticed. The Genesis drifted outside the docking bay of the station, and Lena's heart sank as she surveyed the space around her. Zoratha's fleet had already arrived. "Captain," Rajan said, his voice tight with disbelief, "that's no scout fleet. Those ships are heavily armed. We're dealing with a full-scale invasion force." Lena's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them, not with the Genesis in its current state. The alien energy was wreaking havoc on their systems, and the shield that protected them was slowly weakening. "Divert all power to the shields," she snapped. "We're not running anywhere. We'll need to outmaneuver them." But as she spoke, the warning alarms blared again. The energy levels from the station spiked, far beyond anything they'd anticipated. The bread, it couldn't just be coincidence. Lena's instincts screamed at her that the artifact and the bread were connected in ways she couldn't yet understand. But for now, the immediate threat was clear. Zoratha's fleet wasn't just after the artifact. They wanted to obliterate them, and the Genesis was sitting right in their path. Rajan's fingers danced across the control panel, trying to stabilize their systems. "Shields are at 35%, Captain. The power surge from the artifact is messing with our engines." "We don't have time," Lena said, her voice clipped. "We'll need to engage Zoratha's fleet and buy ourselves enough time to get back to full power. Saria, prepare to launch evasive maneuvers." Saria's eyes met hers, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Aye, Captain. I'll give them everything we've got." The first wave of Zorothian warships loomed large on the screens, their dark forms cutting through space like vultures circling their prey. The Genesis was badly outgunned, but Lena had always trusted in her crew's ability to adapt. This would be no different. "Prepare to engage," Lena barked. "Target their forward shields first. Rajan, fire when ready." The Genesis shook again as they released a series of high-powered blasts, targeting the first Zorathian warship. The shots made contact, but the enemy ship's shields absorbed the impact with little more than a brief flicker. Lena cursed under her breath. They were fighting an uphill battle, and Zoratha's fleet wasn't going to let them escape without a fight. "We're not making a dent," Rajan shouted. "Their shields are too strong." Lena's gaze snapped to the glowing artifact in her hand. The bread beside it pulsed, and for a split second she felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. There was something alive about it. "Shut down the power to the artifact," she ordered. "We can't risk it firing off any more energy while we're in combat. We'll figure out how to use it later." Rajan's fingers flew across the console. "I'm trying, Captain. The surge is too intense. The whole ship's systems are linked to it." "Damn it," Lena muttered. "Saria, take us into evasive maneuvers, fast." Without a moment's hesitation, Saria pushed the throttle forward, sending the ship veering sharply to the left as Zoratha's warships opened fire. The Genesis lurched, but the sharp maneuvering allowed them to dodge most of the incoming blasts. The chase was on. The Genesis darted through space, weaving in and out of the enemy fire. Rajan focused on keeping their shields up while Saria kept the ship moving at impossible angles, narrowly evading the death-dealing beams from Zoratha's fleet. In the chaos of battle, Lena couldn't ignore the connection between the bread and the artifact any longer. She glanced at Rajan, his face taut with concentration as he worked to stabilize their systems. "Rajan, what do you make of the bread?" she asked, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. He barely looked up, his eyes flicking to the glowing piece of toast for a brief moment. "It's somehow tied to the artifact. Whatever power surge we're experiencing, it's coming from that slice of bread." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had no answers, but she trusted Rajan. "Is there any way we can use it to our advantage?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But if we don't figure it out soon, Zoratha's fleet will be all over us." Lena's eyes narrowed. "We don't have a choice. Keep those shields up. I'll think of something." Outside, the battle intensified as more Zorathian ships arrived. The Genesis had made it this far, but it was clear the end was near if they couldn't find a way to turn the tide. "Captain," Saria called, her voice tight. "They're surrounding us. We need to get out of here. We can't keep dodging forever." Lena's mind raced. Time was running out. The power from the artifact and the bread was destabilizing their systems, but Lena could feel it, the faintest whisper of a connection. With no other options, she turned to Rajan. "Divert all remaining power to the bread. Whatever it is, it might be our last chance." Rajan hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Aye, Captain." The moment the order was given, the energy surged once again. The bread began to glow with a blinding intensity, and the entire ship shuddered violently. Then, something incredible happened. The Genesis's engines roared back to life, the energy levels stabilizing. The power from the bread surged forward, not as a destructive force, but as an incredibly potent pulse that expanded outward, shattering the Zorathian fleet's targeting systems and momentarily disabling their weapons. The sudden, unexpected surge left the Zorathian ships confused, their firepower now useless. The Genesis was no longer the hunted, it was the hunter. "Now, Saria!" Lena shouted. "Take us in." With a deft hand, Sariya steered the ship toward the opening in the Zorathian fleet. They had one shot to escape, one chance to turn the tide. As the Genesis shot forward, Lena knew this was only the beginning. The artifact and the bread had changed everything, and she wasn't sure whether they had just gained an advantage or awoken something far more dangerous. But there was no going back now. The quiet after the chaos felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Captain Lena Steele stood at the helm of the Genesis, eyes fixed on the screen displaying the remnants of Zoratha's fleet. The ship was limping, power fluctuating as if the heart of the vessel had just barely survived a mortal wound. The energy from the artifact, and the bread, still surged erratically through the systems. It had saved them, yes, but at what cost? "We've bought ourselves some time, Captain," Rajan reported from his station, his voice strained but resolute. "But the artifact's energy is too unstable. If we don't stabilize it soon, we won't be able to outrun another attack." Lena's hands gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles white. "Can we do anything with the bread? We need to get it under control." Rajan shot a glance at the glowing toast, still resting innocently beside the artifact. "I don't know, Captain. It's as if it's feeding off the artifact's power, but I can't pinpoint how to stop it." The uncertainty gnawed at her. The bread, absurd as it seemed, was the key. But it wasn't just the artifact they had to worry about. The Zorathian Empire had sent a message before their escape. "You have a brief moment. Surrender now, or perish." It wasn't an idle threat. The might of the Zorathian Empire would soon be upon them again, and the Genesis couldn't withstand another full-on assault. Lena stood up, her voice steady but sharp. "Rajan, reroute all power to the engines. We need to put distance between us and Zoratha's fleet." "But Captain, if we don't stabilize the artifact—" "I know," she cut him off, "but we can't do anything if we're dead in the water. Get us moving." The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life, but the energy levels flickered dangerously. Rajan's hands flew over the controls, trying to steady the ship systems, but the artifact's volatile power remained unpredictable. Lena's mind raced. There had to be a way to harness it, to control the energy without risking their lives every time it surged. "Captain," Sariya called from the tactical station, her voice tense. "Zoratha's ships are regrouping. They're accelerating, and it looks like they've deployed reinforcements." Lena felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. They were not out of danger. In fact, the real battle had only just begun. Zorath would not let them slip away. He was patient, calculating, and relentless. And Lena was certain he had already planned his next move. "How long do we have before they catch up?" Lena asked, turning to Sariya. 30 minutes at most," Sariya replied. "They're pushing hard. Our best bet is to outrun them, but our shields won't hold if we stay in this condition." Lena's eyes narrowed. She couldn't afford to run forever. They needed a plan, and fast. She turned back to Rajan. "Rajan, we need to find a way to use the artifact, specifically the bread, to power up the ship. We need it stable." Rajan exhaled sharply. "Captain, I've been running every diagnostic possible. If we keep pushing the artifact like this, the ship could blow apart. It's too much energy." Lena clenched her jaw. "Find a way, Rajan. I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm asking for a solution." Rajan gave a reluctant nod, though his face showed deep concern. "I'll need a few minutes to reroute the systems." "But Captain, this could go wrong." The hum of the ship systems fluctuated as the crew worked in tense silence, their eyes glued to their stations. The seconds felt like hours as they calculated their survival. Lena stared at the bread again. If only she could understand what made it so important. Why was it reacting this way? "Captain, you need to see this," Rajan called, his voice low with uncertainty. Lena moved quickly to his station, where the energy readings from the artifact and the bread were flashing on the screen in violent bursts. The bread's glow had intensified once more, and now, inexplicably, it appeared to be pulsing in sync with the artifact, as if it were absorbing and redirecting the energy. "It's like the bread is a conduit," Rajan murmured, his eyes wide. "But it's not just absorbing power. It's channeling it." Lena frowned, her thoughts racing. Channeling energy. Could it be that simple? Perhaps the bread wasn't just a passive object. It was the key to unlocking the full potential of the artifact, guiding its energy in a controlled direction. Set up a controlled feed. I want the energy directed toward the shields, not the engines, she ordered. Rajan's hands flew over the console as he rerouted the power. Slowly, cautiously, the ship's systems began to stabilize. The shields flickered back to life, their power growing steadily as the bread continued to pulse in a strange harmony with the artifact. Lena exhaled slowly. They were not out of the woods yet, but for the first time in hours, it felt like they had a fighting chance. Just as Lena turned back to her crew, the sensors flared. The Zorathian fleet had arrived in full force. "Captain, they're opening fire!" Saria yelled. The tension was palpable as the first volley of energy blasts shot toward the Genesis. The ship lurched under the impact, but the shields held. "For now. Brace for impact!" Lena shouted, gripping the armrest of her chair. Her heart pounded in her chest as the ship rocked under the onslaught of Zorotha's weaponry. The shields flickered, but they were holding, just barely. The Genesis shuddered again as the power surge from the bread intensified. The energy blast from Zorotha's fleet hit again, this time with greater force, but the bread's glow flared brighter, redirecting the energy from the blast. It wasn't enough to stop the damage, but it was enough to prevent the shields from failing completely. "Report," Lena barked. "Shields holding at 23%, Captain," Rajan called, his voice tight. "But if they hit us again, we're finished." "Damn it," Lena muttered, her mind racing. They couldn't outrun them, not with the Genesis's shields barely functional. And the artifact, while providing them power, was also a ticking time bomb. If they couldn't stabilize it soon, it would be their undoing. "Prepare to engage evasive maneuvers," she ordered, leaning forward in her seat. "We're going to make them chase us. Saria, take us into a full-speed dive toward that asteroid field. We'll use it as cover." Saria nodded grimly, her hand steady as she gripped the controls. "Aye, Captain." Diverting all power to maneuvering thrusters. As the ship careened toward the asteroid field, Lena knew they were on borrowed time. The Zorathian fleet would soon realize that the Genesis wasn't as easy to destroy as they'd anticipated. But the real question was whether the bread, and the artifact, would hold long enough for them to escape. "Hold on, everyone," Lena said quietly, almost to herself. "This is just the beginning." The Genesis dove into the dark expanse of the asteroid field, and the battle for survival escalated to new heights. The asteroid field loomed ahead like an endless labyrinth of jagged rocks, each one a potential death trap. The Genesis shot through the field, weaving between massive floating boulders, its engines roaring as it hurtled forward at breakneck speed. The ship trembled with every near miss, but Lena Steele's eyes were fixed firmly on the display ahead, her mind focused entirely on the battle that was about to unfold. "Captain, they're still tracking us," Rajan called from his station, his voice strained. "Zorotha's fleet is closing in. We can't keep dodging like this forever." Lena's fingers gripped the armrest of her chair, her pulse steady despite the chaos around her. "We don't have forever, Rajan. We need to make it count. Saria, keep us on course. Don't give them a clear shot." Saria, her face set in a mask of concentration, maneuvered the ship with precision, angling it between massive asteroid clusters to block the Zorathian fleet's view. The ship bucked and swerved as blasts from the enemy warships streaked through the field, narrowly missing them each time. "Shields at 15%, Captain," Rajan reported, his fingers flying across the console as he desperately tried to stabilize the failing systems. "The artifact's power surge is spiking again. It's not sustainable." Lena's eyes flicked to the artifact on the command table, the bread glowing beside it. There was no doubt anymore. The artifact and the bread were somehow linked, their power more volatile than anything they had ever encountered. It had saved them from destruction before, but now it was a ticking time bomb. "We have to make a choice," Lena muttered, her mind running through possibilities. "We can't keep using the artifact's power without understanding it. But we can't outrun Zoroth with our shields failing." The tension in the air was suffocating. With every passing second, Zorotha's fleet closed the distance. They were running out of options. The asteroid field, their temporary refuge, was narrowing ahead, and soon they would have nowhere to hide. "Captain," Saria's voice broke through the tension. "We've got one shot. There's a small moon up ahead, just on the edge of the field. It's uncharted, but we can use its gravity to slingshot past Zoroth's fleet. Lena turned her gaze toward Saria. Can you do it? Saria's lips pressed into a tight line. It's risky. If we miss the angle, we'll get caught in the gravity well and lose all control. But it's our only chance. Lena didn't hesitate. Do it. The Genesis raced toward the small moon, its trajectory precise as Saria piloted them closer to the gravitational pull. The asteroid field behind them was becoming a blur of dark rocks, but the Zorathian fleet wasn't far behind. The enemy ships were relentless, matching every move, adjusting their course with terrifying speed. Hold on! Saria shouted as she executed a sharp turn, the ship veering dangerously close to a massive asteroid. Lena's eyes never left the approaching moon. If Saria was right, this was their final opportunity to shake off Zoroth. If they failed, there would be no second chance. Adjusting angle, Saria said under her breath. On my mark. The ship shuddered as another blast from Zoroth's fleet narrowly grazed the rear shields, sending an electric jolt through the ship. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. Mark! Saria barked. The Genesis shot toward the moon, its engines roaring at full capacity. The gravitational field of the moon grabbed hold of them, slingshotting them into high-speed orbit around its surface. The ship pulled hard, and for a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Then, with a massive jolt, the Genesis was thrust forward, its velocity spiking as they shot out of the asteroid field, narrowly escaping the grasp of Zoroth's fleet. Go, go, go! Lena shouted as she watched the asteroid field fade behind them. The Zorathian fleet, momentarily thrown off course by their sudden maneuver, began to regroup, but it was too late. The Genesis was already free. Lena exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in hours, there was a fleeting sense of relief. But that relief was short-lived. They weren't safe yet. Zoroth would regroup, and when he did, there would be no more hiding. Captain, Rajan called, his voice tight. We're out of the asteroid field, but the artifact's energy is destabilizing again. If we don't get control, it'll blow the ship apart. Lena turned toward the artifact. The bread next to it pulsed in a way that seemed almost rhythmic, as though it were syncing with the heartbeat of the ship. But the power surging from the artifact was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was both a blessing and a curse. Its energy had saved them, but it was also a liability. We need to contain the energy, Lena said, her mind racing. Rajan, can you isolate the artifact's power source? Rajan nodded, though his face was drawn with exhaustion. I can try, Captain. But it's going to take time. The bread, it's not just absorbing the power, it's channeling it in ways we don't understand. It's reacting to the ship's systems. Lena's eyes narrowed as she stared at the bread. It wasn't just an object, it was something more. Something alive, perhaps, or at least connected to something greater. And it was controlling the artifact's power. But what was it? And why did it respond to their actions, their ship, their needs? Do what you can, Rajan, Lena said, her voice hard with resolve. But we need to know what we're dealing with. There's something here that we haven't figured out, and I'm going to find out what it is. The quiet hum of the ship was now a constant, almost hypnotic background noise as Rajan worked furiously at the console, trying to stabilize the artifact. The crew was tense, waiting for any signs of failure. But Lena couldn't afford to wait. Zoroth would be on them again soon, and this time they couldn't afford to be caught unprepared. Lena turned her focus to the view screen. The Zorathian fleet had regrouped, and now they were no longer just chasing them, they were hunting them. Zoroth had already made it clear that there would be no negotiation. There would be no mercy. And Lena wasn't about to let him take everything she'd fought for. The ship lurched again, and Lena's eyes snapped to the control panel. The artifact's energy had spiked once more. It was only a matter of time before they couldn't keep it under control. Captain! Rajan shouted, his voice urgent. The artifact, it's reacting to Zoroth's fleet. It's trying to focus its energy on them. Lena's heart stopped. No. Get it under control. Now. But Rajan's face was pale as he looked at the readings. It's not responding. We're about to overload. Lena knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let this ship, this crew, and everything they had fought for go down in a blaze of destruction. "Prepare to engage Zoroth," she ordered, standing tall in the face of what was to come. "We'll end this, one way or another." The Genesis surged forward, powered by the artifact's unstable energy. It was their last chance to take control and prevent total annihilation. They were headed straight for Zoroth's fleet. Lena had no illusions about what would happen next. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for something bigger. The final confrontation had left the Genesis battered, its hull scarred and its systems barely functional. Yet, as Captain Lena Steele stood on the bridge, staring at the view screen before her, the stars beyond seemed just as vast and infinite as they had before. The weight of what had just transpired settled heavily in the pit of her stomach. Zoroth was defeated, yes, but at what cost? The artifact, along with the strange, powerful bread, had unleashed forces beyond her understanding, and yet, against all odds, they had survived. The quiet hum of the ship was the only sound as the crew gathered in the dimly lit command center. The battle had ended, but their work was far from over. Lena's thoughts were still consumed by the artifact's power. It was an enigma, an object so seemingly innocent yet capable of such devastation. The bread was no different, a simple piece of food that had somehow, in ways she couldn't comprehend, become central to the survival of the ship and its crew. "Captain," Rajan's voice cut through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. He stood at his console, his face drawn, but his tone steady. "Zoroth's fleet has retreated. Our scans confirm there's no immediate threat. We're clear for now." Lena exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. "What about the artifact?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Rajan glanced at the glowing artifact in the center of the room, the bread still lying innocuously next to it. The energy readings had dropped significantly, but the artifact's power was far from depleted. "It's stable for now, but I can't say how long that will last. It's like nothing we've ever encountered." "I know," Lena replied, her gaze unwavering. "It's not just a weapon. It's a tool. A tool that we still don't understand." Saria, the tactical officer, stood nearby, her expression thoughtful. "Captain, with Zoroth gone, there's a vacuum. Other factions will see us as a target. The galaxy won't remain quiet for long. The artifact, it's more than just a key to a weapon. It could be a key to something else, something far more dangerous." Lena's eyes darkened, and she nodded slowly. "That's why we need to understand it. We need to know its purpose. And we need to ensure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Hours passed, and the crew continued their work to stabilize the Genesis. The emergency repairs were underway, but there was little doubt that they would need more than just physical repairs. They needed answers, answers that would lead them to understanding the artifact's true power. Lena made her way to the observation deck, staring out at the infinite expanse of space. The stars glittered like diamonds, cold and distant, yet so close in their own way. The feeling of being small in a vast universe was something Lena had always known. But today it was different. Now, she understood that humanity's place in the galaxy had changed. They had survived an empire's wrath, not by sheer strength, but by wit, resilience, and a piece of bread. She smirked to herself at the thought. It had been an absurd journey, from the simple discovery of the artifact to the realization that something as mundane as a toasted slice of bread could hold the balance of life and death. But even as she allowed herself a brief moment of humor, a new thought struck her. What if the bread had been more than just a tool? What if it had been a signal, a message from whoever had placed it here, guiding humanity towards something greater? "Captain," Rajan's voice came over the intercom, breaking her reverie. "We've received a transmission. It's encrypted, but it's coming from an unknown source. We should probably take a look." Lena turned, walking briskly back toward the command center. The last thing she needed right now was more complications, but this could be important. She entered the room just as the encrypted message began to decrypt on the screen. The voice that came through was calm, measured, but with an edge of authority. "Captain Lena Steele, you are now in possession of the artifact known as the Elemental Key. What you have discovered is not a weapon, but a guide, a map. You are being watched." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't surprised by the warning, but the gravity of the statement settled heavily on her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low. "We are the architects, and you are now part of a greater design. Your survival was no accident, Captain. Your species has shown that it has the potential to shape the future of the galaxy. The artifact you have found was placed here long ago, for this purpose. What you do next will determine the course of the future." The message cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lena exchanged glances with Rajan and Saria. "The architects," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Whoever they are, they've been watching us." Rajan's face was pale. "The artifact, it wasn't meant for Zoroth. It was meant for us." Lena didn't respond immediately, her mind already racing with possibilities. The architects had seen potential in humanity. They had designed the artifact to lead them somewhere, perhaps to greater knowledge, perhaps to more dangers than they could fathom. But it was clear now, the bread, the artifact, the power they had tapped into, it wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the beginning. "We need to understand this," Lena said firmly. "We can't afford to ignore this. If the architects are right, then humanity's future is bound to the artifact's power. But we need to prepare for whatever comes next." Saria, always pragmatic, was already working on the next steps. "Captain, if the artifact is a map, we need to decipher it. We need to understand what the architects want us to find." Lena turned to face her officers, her resolve solidifying. "We'll start with the basics. The artifact's energy signature, its code. We'll need to break it down, piece by piece. But we're not doing this alone. I want to send a signal to the Federation. They need to know what's happened here. And they need to prepare for the unknown." The crew nodded in unison, understanding the gravity of their mission. The galaxy had just changed, and they were at the heart of it. Days later, the Genesis had left the asteroid field and was now heading toward a newly established base on a nearby planet. Repairs had been made, but the ship's mission was clear: explore, understand, and prepare for the next step. Lena stood at the command center, staring out at the stars once more. The galaxy had always seemed so vast, so impersonal, but now it felt closer, more fragile. Humanity had proven its worth, not through strength, but through resilience and resourcefulness. They had unlocked something far greater than any weapon, something that could reshape the future. And with that realization came the undeniable truth: their place in the galaxy had only just begun. As the ship sailed toward its new destination, Lena's gaze hardened with determination. They would meet the challenge head-on. And whatever the architects had in mind for humanity, they would be ready. The universe had just shown them its secrets. It was time for humanity to do the same.